Thank you for watching the Chain Trends Crypto podcast. Today I have a very special guest with me, Jon Radoff, founder and CEO of Beamable. Jon, thank you so much for joining me. Can we just start a little bit? Just tell me about your background and who you are and how you ended up, as a CEO of Beamable.
Yeah, thanks. I guess if you go back to the beginning, I had two things I really liked doing as a kid: playing Dungeons and Dragons and coding computer stuff. So made some games when I was just a kid, but ended up starting a game studio with my wife, who I met in an online game. Built one of the first internet-based online games. Went from that to started a creator platform for the World Wide Web called ePrize. I started an ad network called Gamer DNA, which was for like AAA PC console games that needed to get exposure on the web. Then started making games again, made games based on popular television shows, ended up entertaining like 20 million plus people who were playing like Star Trek and Game of Thrones type stuff. And then, about a year ago, decided to launch Beamable out of some technology that had been created at that game studio, Disruptor Beam. And the reason why is that I love making games, but I saw an opportunity just to multiply that many, many thousands, even millions of times over by taking the infrastructure that we had invented and bringing that to all of the emerging game developers of the world and AAA studios who are grappling with complexity and everybody in between. So that's what we're doing at Beamable. And I started writing building the Metaverse blog about the same time. And that's because I see game tech really is what's going to power the metaverse. And the metaverse is kind of the longer term view of everything that will come out of game development. But, Beamable is a game development platform to help people make entertaining experiences for people right now.
Awesome. And just how would you describe the metaverse, like on a basic level, if I was, 5 years old.
Yeah. My definition of the metaverse has evolved a little bit over time. So today I don't think of it so much as technology as much as I think of it really as the culture trend behind it. So if I was talking to a 5-year-old, I would say, when you go online and you're playing games and you have stuff that you do there and experiences, and it's very real to you, and you own things and you express yourself online. That's what the metaverse is. So to me, we now have a couple of generations of people that have grown up with virtual worlds and virtual property. Crypto, of course, is part of that, virtual assets. But really at that core is the idea that the way people express themselves online is now just as important, or in many cases, even more important than people's expressions in the physical reality that we live in. So that's really what's important about the metaverse. And then you can make a long list of technologies that support that, whether it's virtual worlds or VR or blockchain or a whole bunch of different things. But it's all driven by that culture trend of online personal expression, online experiences that I'm having with other people.
Right. And I saw a video of you about 6 years ago talking about community building and the evolution of gaming. And, you saw that coming from a mile away, obviously, which was awesome. And so then I started to get into your Medium, your blog posts and essays, and some of the stuff I read, I was remarkable work. You wrote an article or an essay rather, called Game Economics Part 1, The Attention Economy. And you identified that in, I guess, 1980, Pac-Man generated about $1 billion from an arcade game, right?
Yep.
And how that kind of evolved into this attention economy. Can you kind of summarize that and give us some thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I will say that the market for games is evolving, and that I think there's an emerging creator economy, which is very different than everything that's existed in the past. But if you go back to the origins of the video game industry, yeah, a arcade game machine was something that you put quarters in, and the way you made that asset, that machine, productive as an asset was you got to maximize the number of quarters that are going through it. So games were really designed with this scaling difficulty where it would be kind of easy to get you into it and try it. But then as soon as it starts getting harder and harder, you're going to run into problems. And eventually they figured out that rather than just the game over event, we should just have people put more quarters in so to continue the game. Ended up being much more efficient. And then they figured out that, by the way, that one machine doesn't have to be just one player at a time. You could have multiple people playing on the same machine. So those were the early ways. And I think every game up until maybe these more creatively centered games was attention-based, whether it was the arcade machine, even like things you don't think of as attention-centric, like buying a game and then buying the sequel of the game. Well, you're buying the sequel of the game because of how engaged you were with that first game. And the more time you spent, the more likely you are to want to play the next game in that sequence. And then, of course, free-to-play games built on top of that. This goes beyond that first article you're talking about, but free-to-play games eventually started tapping into that by building economies around their game. And yeah, you're buying items and currencies in the game experience, but the likelihood of you buying currencies or items was really proportionate for most players to the amount of time that you're deploying behind the game, and sometimes just the time you want to save once you've started, going into those gameplay experiences.
Wow, yeah, and now lately, COVID-19 has accelerated, game adoption and revenues, and you point that out in the mega deck, or the Metaverse mega deck. You, also in that same deck, you have the Metaverse broken down into 7 layers. Can you talk about that, or do you yeah?
Sure. I mean, I think it's like an onion, right? So the layers is about the value chain in the industry and how it's getting constructed. But the outermost layer of that onion is the experiences that we're going to have there, because I think that's what everybody actually cares about. Like everything else is just ways to produce the kinds of experiences that people are going to have. Now, the main category of experience that people already have been having in the metaverse for some time is games, multiplayer online game experiences. So that's what people have been doing. And I think that a lot of the additional experiences that people are going to have are really informed by that, whether it's these newer things around music or social experiences, like in VR chat, for example. Like all of that is either built on game technology or around the kinds of experiences that you can extend from gameplay into something that's kind of new.
Great. And before I get into my next question, just want to establish the difference. There was a couple things. Metcalfes Law for network effects, Reed's Law, and Radoff's Law. Can you tell me what could we establish what they are?
That's funny. Yeah. So, Metcalfes Law is really a way of trying to value network effects. So, without getting super technical, it was just the idea that everything that comes onto the network adds value to the whole network. So an early example of that was the telephone system, right? So if you only have 2 telephones on the network, you're limited in value. But if you've got 1 million or many billions of people on the network for telephones, then your telephone actually is so much more valuable because of all the interactions you can have on it. So the next stage, though, beyond that was the idea that a lot of networks gain more value according to how easy it is for groups to form on them. So Facebook, for example, a lot of the value around Facebook just came about because people were forming subgroups. So subgroup formation also adds this whole other additional layer of value beyond just sort of point to point like you have on a telephone system or in a internet-based system like TCP/IP, which isn't point to point, but it's just sort of adding all these different nodes to the network. Within a social network, you start to have groups form. So your timeline, for example, on your Facebook page or on Twitter, for example, is just an example of where you can share a piece of content with your group very easily and interact with those people. So it was seen as a way to add even more value. And I think that the social networks that we exist today coming out of Web 2 kind of proved that. Like Web 2 companies captured an enormous portion of the value out of like the Web 1, the early internet stuff. So my law, which is just, I love that you brought it up, but it's really, more of an informal principle than it is like a mathematical formulation. It's just the idea that when you look at these networks, you can find that there are networks that really allow for emergent creativity and innovation to happen within them versus more of a closed ecosystem. And the position I'm taking, which I think has been proven a bunch of ways, is just that when that's an open system, an emergent system, that's where you really maximize innovation and creativity. So what are some examples of both? So if you look at the internet and Web 1.0 being the original platform that all this stuff was built in, that is an open ecosystem. Anybody could participate in the World Wide Web. You just have to get a web server, connect it to the network, and you're in business. You start publishing content. And that's still, of course, the case. Like World Wide Web is the original open, decentralized platform of the internet. Now, what Web 2.0, what Web 2 was really about was in that ecosystem, they realized there's certain things that are really hard to do. One of the things that's hard to do is just publishing content. Another thing that people realized was hard to do was aggregating big audiences. All right. So all of the big Web 2 businesses did that in some way. They made it easy to aggregate audiences. They made it easy to publish and connect with other people. So you had the emergence of things like Facebook, Twitter, and whatnot. So people traded access to that simplicity for a lot of both their personal power and the potential to innovate within it. And I think the best evidence of that is show me a company that was built exclusively inside a Web 2 company that's now as big or bigger than another Web 2 company, right? So there's no Facebook that launched from inside Facebook, right? There's, that's just the structure of it. Why is that? That's because when you build a network that's closed, yes, you can deliver a lot of value to the participants in that, but it's also constrained because those individual participants don't really have the ability to do whatever they want. It's not like the World Wide Web where you can create anything, connect to other people, own it, decide how you're going to monetize it, et cetera. If you're stuck in that ecosystem, it's going to really route you back towards that central resource, that central platform for everything that you want to do. And that limits what's possible. Now there's sort of, it's not completely black or white for all of these. Like I look at, Windows development or PC development actually is much closer to internet Web 1, because you can still like make any piece of PC software you want. It's not like iOS, for example, where you have to essentially publish on an app store. Apple decides whether you get to be there or not. They get to determine like what share of the revenues they got. PC software still pretty open, right? So you can kind of compare those two and look at the extent of the innovation on PC. Right. So in PC software development, you do, in fact, have these enormous companies which got started as a PC software developer because they could do whatever they want. And they built large companies out of it. You don't see, iOS. I mean, I don't want to take away from anyone who has built big companies, because you do have big companies. I'm talking about like truly titanic size where they've scaled out as big as the ecosystems that they came from. So there are definitely multi-billion-dollar companies that have been created inside the iOS ecosystem, for example. Like you got game companies like, Supercell with Clash of Clans was one of the first really to get to that kind of scale in that ecosystem. But you're limited in what you're ultimately able to do, and people haven't taken it to that whole next level. So that I think is where we go to next. That's why I'm bullish on open systems in general, decentralization, Web3, which is part of that, just really opening up the creativity and the innovation of all the developers and creators that exist out there so that they can build things with the opportunity to scale it up as big as their imagination allows for, just like all the Web 1.0 companies got to do.
It's amazing. While you were talking, you mentioned constrained networks. Can you talk about the difference between constrained networks and emergent networks, and just basically what they are and what the difference between them are?
Yeah, think of a constrained network, and in the most simple form is like a hub and spoke system, right? So imagine a service at the core, and then all the interactions in that system have to be routed through the core. So imagine if you were stuck with a telephone system, for example, where everybody, like every single person actually had to be routed through one central switchboard, right? Very early telephone systems actually kind of worked like that, but eventually it became, it wasn't possible to scale out that way. But you could also apply that to a lot of software systems as well. There's a lot of software systems that exist today where, yes, they provide an API, but to add anything, to extend anything, to build off that ecosystem, you have to route all of your requests through the central provider, which does a few things. One is it puts them in charge of declaring exactly who gets to participate, what the rules are. They regulate the content creation, and typically because of the power that they've got, they get outsized, share of whatever the economics is. An emergent network is one where lots of people can build off the network. So again, you have a continuum through its simplest form. The very simplest form of a constrained network is going to be something like that hub and spoke. The most emergent one is one where nobody asks for permission and anybody can participate. And if you see something that exists, you can just riff off of it. So an example of that would be open source software development, for example. So you see something in open source. If you want to build off of it, you fork the code, you build your own version, and look at all the software that exists today because of the emergent properties of open source development. Blockchain, of course, has similar properties in terms of value exchange between nodes on the network, which is why you're seeing all of this innovation around decentralized finance and new applications there, and things happening with the metaverse and games and all that really depends on this open value exchange system, which is transformative.
Nice. And what is the difference between internalized network effects and externalized network effects?
So an internalized network effect is something like you see on Facebook, where there's those network effects because, of course, people are connecting with each other, and every single person that joins the platform, in essence, adds value to the whole platform, because the whole point of Facebook, for example, is that they've got an enormous number of people on there. And as people joined, there was a reason to be there. You wanted to share your photos with your friends, your stories with your friends. It kind of had this gravitational pull into the platform, but it's all inside Facebook, right? So there's a few other services like Facebook Login and stuff that sort of appear on the outside, but really the whole point of those is the gravitational pull back into the inside of that system. And I don't actually mean to pick on Facebook in particular, like that's a property of a whole bunch of other platforms as well that will be familiar to everyone, but that's probably the most familiar because they're so large. A unconstrained network or an open network is one where the value goes up across the ecosystem. It's not all the value goes back to like the central authority or the central platform. So PC software development is an example of that. Like Microsoft, actually Bill Gates back in the day said, a real platform is one where most of the value goes back to the ecosystem, not back to Microsoft or the creator of the purported platform. So, and that's because anybody can build PC software. I think in his example, they provided a foundation and you'd have to get Microsoft Windows or MS-DOS before that. But really, it was up to the ecosystem then to build on top of that and derive the benefit of all of the economics for their own creations. So that's the main difference is, does the ecosystem get most of the value creation, or does the value creation really mostly go back to one single company?
Wow. We brought up Facebook and Meta. What are your thoughts on, Facebook just changed their name to Meta, and now a lot of people are confusing that with the Metaverse. What is your thoughts on, but how important is decentralization in this? And what are the impacts of centralized type entities with this in this kind of world?
Yeah. So there's a lot of confusion out there generally, I think, and there's a lot of definitions of even what metaverse means. I shared my version, which is I think it's largely driven by the culture trend first and foremost, and then the technologies to support that. So listen, I think that we need big, extremely well-funded R&D operations to do some parts of this. For example, virtual reality technology, semiconductors, gaming platforms. A lot of this stuff does in fact require a lot of capital to get right. And there are certain advantages to centralized companies in a lot of cases. And I think, frankly, it's good that Facebook is investing in things like the Oculus. That's giving us a whole new way of accessing this content. And without that, there probably wouldn't be a lot of cool VR development that's underway. So I think there's a place for that. And I'm not particularly exclusionary. Like, I see a future where the metaverse is a network of a lot of things with hardware companies and some walled gardens, whether it's Facebook Horizons or Roblox or all that kind of stuff happening. That's fine, because what that does is it gives people a creative outlet to do stuff. It's just that no one platform can really satisfy all the forms of creativity that people are going to have, nor will you scale it up into enormous businesses. But you may really satisfy the creative and financial goals of lots of individual participants within that. I think interoperability and open systems is really important to unlock most of the economic value in the system, and also just empower people to be creative and have the self-expression that they want to have. So I don't think that this future is as simple as like it's all open or Facebook owns everything. I think there's going to be both of that. Now, my role in the industry with Beamable is to support that open systems developer who wants to own something, who wants to create it, who has lots of options around, say, graphics and production values and gameplay systems that they want to incorporate into the vision for their game. Make it be able to do anything that you might be able to do in Roblox, for example, or in a more sophisticated game, but have the freedom to go and do that kind of development anywhere you want and decide what kind of community, what kind of economy you're going to build around that game. So I think we need that to give humanity the most options for making the kind of experiences that we're going to want to have.
Right. Now, Beamable, you brought up Beamable. Is Beamable like a software developer kit for for game developers? What exactly is Beamable, and what is its main function in the space?
It's cloud-based infrastructure for game developers. So these days, almost any game that gets created is what I call a live game, meaning it's got a community around it. It's got, in many cases, a sophisticated and deep economy built around it. And this doesn't just mean like big MMOs or free-to-play games. Even single-player games these days are live games in the sense that the community is built around the game, at least for the games that are really sustainable and scalable and are growing a lot. So we exist to provide software on the internet that makes it so that you can build a live game and focus on creativity and do the stuff that you as a game developer are really good at without worrying about, are my servers going to stay up? Can it support my players with all the social features and economy features that they really care about? That's what we do. So we're a software platform to enable that, and very much a platform in the Bill Gates-ish sense of providing a platform where that value is going to be created for our ecosystem of game developers. And then longer term, I see game development and game technology is the foundational technology of the metaverse, which will be not only games, but social experiences and music and telepresence travel and all these amazing things that we're already starting to see the signs of inside games, right?
Right. Now, is Beamable considered a low-code platform? You talk about like 9 megatrends. Would Beamable fall in that category or no?
Well, there's a heck of a lot less code that you have to create, so for sure, right?
Okay.
And, game development almost always involves some amount of code. So what we want our developers to do, though, is when they're writing code, it's the code that's really unique to their game and it's closer to the experience of gameplay, as opposed to these things that are like down in the weeds around, how to get a social system working, or a chat system, or an economy and inventory management system running, or DevOps and deployment systems and debugging up and down this complex stack of technologies. We have invested a lot in creating that platform. And that's our vision there, really, to democratize, simplify game development that will incorporate these live game components in them.
So when you mention something like low code platforms, does that mean somebody who doesn't have experience coding can use some of these, or you still have to have, a pretty strong programming background?
I wouldn't say that's the market we're going after today. In the grand scheme of things, we do want anybody to just go like direct from imagination to the screen. That would be the vision of the company. The reality of today is that we're focused on game developers who do it for a living, want to get online, want to make a competitive commercial game product. We see kind of movement away from the AAA studios where they're trying to simplify down their practices. We see what are called the AA studios, where they tend to be capital constrained and nobody can hire all these back-end engineers and DevOps people anyway. So we help provide that so that they can focus their capital, their time, their resources on building the creativity. And yeah, we're starting to see some of the developers who have had success in things like a Roblox. And Roblox is not a no-code environment. There's a bunch of coding in Roblox, but it's lower code because they give you a lot of the things that you need to build a game. We're starting to see some of those more successful developers essentially evolving into game studios or indie game developers on their own. So it's that kind of convergent set of forces where there's thousands and thousands of games being shipped each month, but a real gap between the number of games being made, the amount of capital going into games relative to the real availability of all of those back-end services, infrastructure, cloud-based technology to support social, games with interesting economies around them.
Wow. Yeah. And what are some opportunities that you see, new opportunities, let's say? What are some new opportunities going forward that you're excited about in the metaverse?
Well, if we want to talk about the metaverse, I think that you can already see signs of it around music, for example. So Fortnite and Roblox both had, many, many millions of people show up to experience music concerts. We've seen that in Decentraland as well. Now they've done that. So music is really interesting because the problem with music concerts is not everybody can get to one and not everyone can get to the best seats. And this technology allows you to dematerialize the experience of live performance in really interesting ways and open that up in a much more abundant fashion to everybody who wants to experience it. And then also even add new facets to the experience that are not, possible within our physical reality. I think a lot of social stuff that's happening, like VR chat, I think is very interesting. I think what's happening in Rec Room is very interesting. And then certain kinds of experiences in Roblox are purely social experiences where it's more about hanging out with your friends and interacting online as opposed to playing the kind of game experiences that gamers have gotten to know over time. Longer term, there will be other things, like there's the far out things around like telepresence, travel, and maybe certain kinds of shopping experiences, and like workplace collaboration where we're wearing augmented reality glasses and we feel more organically connected to the people around us. Like, I think that stuff comes as well, but those are sort of the longer time horizon. If I think of the metaverse, there's the metaverse of right now, which is largely online games and even kind of what we're doing now, Zoom meetings, video teleconferencing in real time, social audio platforms like Twitter Spaces and Clubhouse. Like, that's the metaverse of now. Where we go to next is dematerializing experiences like music, for example, and other kinds of social experiences that people already want to have. And we can move to that next. And then there's the long-term stuff, like AR, where that's going to add to our physical reality, add new kinds of collaboration and whatnot. It has lots of really interesting applications in education and training and all kinds of stuff like that. But that's where the hardware really has to catch up a lot relative to where we are right now.
Right. And where would you say we are on, let's say, a timeline to like mass adoption? Do you think we're far 5-10 years away, or are we approaching?
Well, again, I think if you accept my definition of the metaverse as the culture trend that is about self-expression and digital identity online, then we have the metaverse now, and all those things we just talked about are just additional applications of that and additional improvements to the hardware that make it more fun to use, for example. So I think it's very much here, and it's already mass adopted, and we've got a couple of generations that have grown up with this, and they're going to be, more and more online than ever before. And the younger kids who are in Roblox now are going to become, the future professionals throughout the world who this is just second nature for.
Yeah, that's I think Planck's principle. I think science moves forward as a generation kind of passes away, unfortunately. But I think it's 6 out of 10, and I saw this in one of your articles. 6 out of 10 teens spend time with their friends online. So, I mean, yeah, I guess we already.
Exactly. And sometimes that's a game. Sometimes maybe that just means texting. Maybe it means going into Roblox and just hanging out, but not really being super intentional about like a game-based goal within the system. It's happening. I mean, it's already happening. The technology will improve and give us the ability to experience more of it, in particular with augmented reality. Like, that's where all this metaverse stuff starts bleeding out back into our physical space in really interesting ways. That really requires the ergonomics to improve a lot. Like, I want to wear something that's more like sunglasses, not like a big headset. The battery life has to go all day long. It has to be comfortable. It has to be cool looking. Well, for me, it doesn't have to be that cool looking, but for a lot of people, it has to be cooler looking than it currently does. So those are the things that make AR adopted at massive scale.
Yeah. Wow. And we talked about mentioned mega trends. You had 9 of them. I had a question about you said virtual mainstreaming, challenges by open platforms, walled green ecosystems. And there was a comment, something along the lines of too few walled ecosystems could be a problem. Too few. What is that
Walled garden
exactly?
ecosystems.
Right, right.
The point I'm making there is that there's nothing inherently wrong with a walled garden, like Rec Room, Facebook, Roblox. These are all walled garden environments in the sense that they have a really cool set of experiences that you can have in them, and they've made access easy, and they aggregate audiences so you can connect people with experiences, and social groups can move between them from place to place in a pretty frictionless way. The problem would be if there was like one or two walled gardens that took over everything, because that means that you're going to have far fewer choices. Your creativity, even your interactions are going to be highly regulated. And it means that those one or two walled gardens, they get to command massive economic share of the market. So I would be totally fine if there was millions of walled gardens. Like, to me, every game can be its own walled garden. Like, there's a little bit of a misunderstanding sometimes in terms of like what it means, for example, to have the openness, the trustless, permissionless blockchain technologies applied towards games. That doesn't mean that like every game is a wild, wild west where you have to accept all the content that exists everywhere else into your game. It's just giving everybody sovereignty over their own creations. So if you're a game creator in a network of blockchain enabled games, you'll get to decide what the manifestation of, say, an NFT on someone's avatar, what that means within your game, as opposed to being forced to accept. There will be some games that do want to accept everything, and that's totally fine. Again, like, you are then providing that space for people to have that completely free form creativity in. And then there will be other stuff that's more like a theme park where they man the gates and they decide what's allowed to come in or out of the environment. And that'll be fine too, because people are looking for those curated experiences that they can have as well. So I think all of that will exist. I think of most games, almost every game is actually a walled garden. So it's fine to have millions of them. I just don't want to have, a handful of them where then everybody has to go there for all of the kinds of experiences that you're going to have online.
In your opinion, with the creator economy, is now the time to start, getting involved and pumping content out into the metaverse, and how can one kind of find their way through there and find the right community?
I mean, it's so early in all of this stuff. It's less early for game development, but that's a creator economy you can jump into now. And there's lots of really interesting ways to extend game experiences, to build content, to do storytelling, or for that matter, just be an indie game developer. To me, that's part of the creator economy, or any game developer. You don't have to be a quote unquote indie. That's another word that people just interpret any number of different ways that are kind of incompatible with each other. So the game market is a couple $100 billion a year content market that people can participate in. Is it easy to break into? No, I won't claim that, because it's one that really requires you to build up a portfolio and learn a lot and understand what players want. But I think what's behind that is just approach it with a lot of curiosity, right? And humility as well. So I would take that curiosity and humility and apply that to all of the metaverse. So these newer things where it's like experiences in VR chat that are more purely social, or NFT art and generative systems and all this interesting stuff that people kind of collect into this definition of the metaverse. If you want to get involved in it, then it's early. And the real thing that you need to do is be super humble, I think, because there's a lot of cynics out there, and just be curious about what's going on and start learning. I wouldn't necessarily tell you that you're going to have an immediate financial payoff today. Like, everyone hears the stories of so-and-so flipped an NFT for all kinds of money. like, yeah, that is happening. There are speculators out there. There's scammers for that matter. But that's not the reason to get involved. The reason to get involved would be because you share this vision for this next generation of the internet that we're going in, which is all about self-expression and creating things and being able to express yourself, whether that means art or music or world building or game design, and you want to play a role in how this thing's going to evolve. Sure, there's lots and lots of opportunities to get involved, but don't get involved because you see the quick buck that you could make. I think that there's probably many people being disappointed in that respect right now. This is going to be an investment for most, and tune out the people who are making a quick buck, because that happens in every market. That shouldn't be the thing that lures you into it.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, monetary incentives only go so far. It's got to be something inside.
Well, do it because you're passionate about it, but I would say that financial reward is important for a creator economy. Like, I really believe that if people make something, they should be able to earn from it. And ideally, we want to have a future where everybody can earn a living from it as well. Like, you should be able to be a full-time creator in game development, in the metaverse, whatever version of the metaverse is. So that's important, but know that, I've been in game development for a long time. Just as I was commenting earlier, like, it's a break-in industry. It does require kind of a long-term commitment before you are going to start making money at it. Not many game studios will hire entry-level people who have never built a game before, who don't have a portfolio. So, like, assembling that portfolio and like practicing your craft is really important in game development. Now, as we expand that out to the metaverse, it's the same thing. Like, be honing your craft, whatever that means to you: art, music, coding for that matter, generative systems, world building, storytelling, writing. Hone that craft, because that's what's going to really sustain you into this and ultimately have more of a financial reward. But it's not going to come fast. Just, it never comes fast in almost every form of creativity.
That's right. That's great advice. And my last question is, what are your favorite? I see all those books behind you. I'm a big reader. Can you recommend like 2 or 3 books that you think somebody should read?
Oh boy, putting me on the spot for books. Everybody should read Lord of the Rings. That's one of my favorite series.
Love that. Yeah, I've read those.
If you're interested in the metaverse, you should read Snow Crash. That's where the word was invented. Now, I think that the metaverse that Neil Stephenson envisioned is not the metaverse that we're building, but you should know it. You should go look back in the background.
Definitely.
And if you want a really interesting science fiction series, the series that starts with the 3-body problem, I think is mind-blowing. So check that out as well. So I could go on and on with books, but there's a few that you can get started with.
I might be bothering you.
Dune is my last one, just because the movie just came out, but like, Dune is the best science fiction book I've read. So
yeah, actually, I just
not quite as recent.
Yeah, just started it actually.
I'll have to reread it. I'll have to reread it so I can watch it with the new movie.
Yeah, I just started it myself. Actually, that's funny you said it. But that's all I got. What are some your websites? Twitter, whatever, your plugs or anything you want to plug?
Yeah, well, if you're a game developer and you want to build a live game and you want to make it scale and make it easier for you, come to beamable.com. That's my company. My own website is metavert.io. That's just my personal website. And you can find me on Twitter. I'm J Radoff. You can search for Building the Metaverse with my name, and you'll come across my Medium blog or my YouTube channel. So I love writing about this stuff. It's all just a way for me to open source my thinking about all of this developing technology and engage with people, and not just the people who love all the articles I post, but people who critique things. It just makes me smarter every time I have one of those interactions. So, whoever you are, would invite you to check out my content. Let me know what you think, and let's build a metaverse that we're all going to like.
Right. There will be links in the description to Jon's Medium articles. I'd highly suggest that they're read. They're excellent. Thank you so much, Jon, for coming on. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time.
My pleasure. Thank